Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Game Time Discussions. I'm Cameron Selby here with Emery Cuzzy. Today we are going to do a little bit different. We've been doing heavy fantasy content. We're going to talk through all 14 playoff teams last year. Every year there's about 6 or 7 teams that don't make the playoffs the following season compared to when they do. It's a parity-driven league. Usually about half are out and half are in. And we're going to kind of decipher between who is most likely to be missing and who is most at risk of not making the top 7 in their respective conferences.
Right. And, with this whole thing, like Cam said, about 6 every year are in and out. Even when there was 12 teams, it was about 6. There's going to be some teams, though, that we think, they have such a good chance of making it again that we're going to get into. The ones that you can now see on the board, something catastrophic has to go wrong for them to not make it. Kansas City Chiefs, they're the 2-time back-to-back Super Bowl champs. And the only way they don't make it is if something happens like with the Tom Brady issue in 2008, I believe. 2008, is that the right year?
2008? Yeah, 2008.
Okay, I thought so.
And right off their undefeated regular season.
18-1, right, yeah. It's Randy Moss year.
And they still won 11-5, and they were one of the first 11-5 teams to ever miss.
Right.
It was just because of a wild year.
So we expect KC to be back. They're one of the easiest to predict. They've got the 16th strength of schedule. That is actually the same strength of schedule as Cincinnati, and Cincinnati was worst in their division. So that kind of tells you, where they rank. They're right in the middle, but they're pretty easy to predict.
Yeah, and on top of that, there's just really no competition in their division. They've dominated. They have not lost the division since he is taken over, and even before that, when it was Alex Smith for his last couple seasons, they were taking, I believe it's 7 straight, if I remember correctly, which is crazy insane. They're minus 600 to make the playoffs.
Yes, that's exactly what I was looking.
And similar to San Francisco, on top of that, they've just been NFC Championship or better through the last 4 years. Their win total is one of the highest. Their juice is actually on the under, but I think something catastrophic has to go wrong because of these teams. Usually, like if Jalen Hurts went down, Patrick Mahomes, Jared Goff went down, and it was one of their backups, since it's such a step down compared to what their starter is, I can understand that being the catastrophic event. San Francisco has proven that in spite of who the quarterback is, they're still going to be a playoff team. Their only thing is just if the NFC is actually better than we think, and we do have a 10-win team miss. I mean, they went 10-7 their Super Bowl hangover year of their first Super Bowl against Kansas City. They went 10-7 the following year and were a wild card team. So if the NFC is better than we expect, that could be their catastrophic event. But even quarterback wise, I don't think that there would be a massive drop off if Brock Purdy were no longer to be the quarterback due to some kind of forsaken injury.
Right. And so if you just kind of, for reference, Kansas City right now is minus 230 to win the AFC West, and San Francisco is minus 195 to win the NFC West. So kind of gives you a little bit of background. Both of these teams are expected to not only make the playoffs, but also win their respective divisions. And then, going down to Detroit is our favorite roster in the NFL. No holes. They address their holes. We talked about that a lot. They not only signed 2 players before the draft and in the offseason, but then they also go and draft 2 secondary players in Terrion Arnold and I am blanking Ennis Rakestraw.
Yep.
So that gives them a lot of firepower back there. They have one of the best units overall in their O line, and so I'm excited to see them. They're going to win a lot of games. 12 feels about right to me in my eyes.
Right.
So
yeah, and then Philly again, kind of part of half of their division is weaker, obviously, with 2 of them being the 6 worst teams last season, and then Dallas, they took a massive step back this year because of their poor offseason. They lost a lot of depth. Last year, that was kind of one of their strong points and why they had a 3rd straight season of 12 plus wins, or 12 wins exactly. And they lost it all. They didn't do anything in free agency. They took a chance on the rookies that they have, and even though they've drafted better than most franchises, that doesn't help them in the short term. And they're going to be starting 2 rookies on their offensive line. Their anchor is gone. Zach Martin could be mulling retirement. And then now there's the Dak awkward situation. CD,
Right.
you didn't pay like you should have, and we'll talk about Dallas in a moment because they were one of the playoff teams last
Yeah,
year.
they'll be on here.
But again, that just kind of leaves Philly by default. And on top of that, if you want to do narrative, 20 straight years, 20 straight different winners every year in the NFC East.
Right.
So Dallas won the division last year. So they're my pick to not win the division this year. And
Good call.
yeah, it's been working for 20 years. So why break some if it's not worth
if it's don't fix it if it's broke, right? Or
if it ain't broke, don't
fix it. Thank you. Oh my gosh. But yeah, so with Philly too, it's like this is something we talked about. If they don't win the division, I still feel comfortable that they're in. Like that's my thing. Like with Philly is like I still think they're still in, even if they don't win the division.
And
if
I know they collapsed and had an awful into the season, similar to Dallas, but they were still 10-1, and their main issue was the secondary. And similar to Detroit, they signed 2 secondary players, and then their first 2 picks are 2 of our top 3 corners in this entire class.
Yes, it's
so crazy. And obviously, Cooper DeJean dealing with an injury at the very moment. But again, I don't expect them to just come out the gate and be Pro Bowl caliber players. But regardless, what they have now is much better than what they had last year. That was their main fix. Jason Kelsey is a big loss. Fletcher Cox a big loss. But guess what? That was their 2 deepest positions was up front on both sides. So
they kind of expected that to happen, I feel like. And also, one thing I will point out, they're the 21st strength of schedule.
Yeah,
like they have an opportunity to
that's one of the best of the entire playoff teams.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you go to the next grouping, this is a smaller group. It's there should return even if it's a wild card spot. I think the Ravens in their situation. So if you just look at the NFC North as a whole, and we have 3 teams to talk about in the NFC North because 3 teams made the playoffs last year, and 3 of them, the ones that made the playoffs, all have top 5 strength of schedule or worst strength of schedules. While Cincinnati is on the outside looking in, they're at 16, still not great, but much better than the rest of them. And we'll get into the other 2 teams, but Baltimore, they didn't get better. And that's why they're in this grouping and not the top grouping because they went down.
The main difference is I see an avenue where Baltimore is just they take a step back because of a slight hangover. And because the AFC is so good, they go 10-7 and they don't have the tiebreakers. And so even if Lamar's healthy, I can see a path where they miss.
Right.
But the other 4 teams, I don't see a path if they are all healthy and something catastrophic didn't go wrong that they would miss. Whereas the Ravens, I could see them missing with Lamar, which sounds crazy. He's one of the best and winningest regular season quarterbacks. However, again, second hardest schedule this year. There's not a ton of gimmies for them. And so they're going to have to earn it. And to win the division comfortably, you're going to have to get to 12 wins. And I definitely don't see that. I think it's a 10-11 win team. And if you're on the wrong side of that 10 wins, Buffalo, remember, at the end of the season last year, they were either going to win the division or they were going to fall out of the playoffs.
Right.
So you just never know with the tiebreakers and stuff like that. But they have the hardest division in football. All 4 teams finished with a winning record last year, and everybody plays them tough. So, we'll just kind of see what happens. And then skipping over to Houston, similar boat. They had the lowest win total last year, and then Jacksonville kind of collapsed due to injury, and then Indy lost their quarterback, and Tennessee, benching quarterback and weird situation and system, terrible offensive line. And so they kind of were slow and steady and just continued to win, games they were supposed to. But this year, harder strength of schedule. They probably won the offseason in the grand scheme of things.
Right, of course.
But again, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to improve their win total. That just means that their team is stronger. They probably have a better chance against the top of the top if they're on the road in the second round, if they get that far.
So if you look at, talking about schedules alone, like if you just look at the Texans' schedule, of course they have to play their own division 6 times, or 6 games. And I think their division's tough. So 3-3 feels pretty comfortable to me. I think that they could, lose to even the Titans in one game because I think the Titans are better than we kind of expect. Kansas City, Baltimore, Miami, and Tennessee are their last 4 games after the bye.
And they're in 10 days.
And in 10 days. Exactly. That's what And then other teams that they have to play that aren't part of their division: Dallas, Detroit, the Jets, Green Bay. They get New England. Okay. There's your gimme. Buffalo.
But on the road.
At New England. Buffalo, Chicago, at Minnesota. Yeah, that's all. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty rough. That's
That
tough.
is pretty
That
rough.
is
Again,
tough.
where is the gimmies? I mean, they're going to be favored in probably about 10, 11 games this year, but that doesn't always necessarily correlate.
Right.
So we'll just kind of see. I would just be careful about any kind of bets because they are like minus 190 to make the playoffs. They are the favorites to win their division, but I'm not counting out Jacksonville right now. They were tied for the 1 seed 11 weeks in, and then they just kind of fell apart. The Colts were 9-8 with Gardner
I was gonna
Minshew,
say Indy too.
and then Tennessee is formidable. This is probably they're in a transition year, so they're going to be just a competitive 6-7 win team.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can't drop a game to them
Yeah.
because they've swept the Indy before when they've been good, and Jacksonville has had trouble before with them. So that's just kind of why they're in that tier. Is that I could see scenarios where both of these teams are healthy and yet just aren't winning the games that really, really matter when it
Right.
comes to the tiebreakers and whatnot.
And then the next grouping is the wide range of outcomes group, and that's just because like this is the group where we think that there's a certain amount of teams that can make. We know there's a certain amount of teams that make the playoffs, and out of these teams, we don't expect all of them to make it because that's just how the NFL works. There's teams on the outside that barely didn't make it in last year. There's teams that got a lot better. Chicago, Cincinnati, these teams that are farther out, and this grouping has to deal with those teams.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So basically, with this tier, I think at least one of, but probably just one of the Rams, the Cowboys, and the Packers will miss the playoffs because we are giving at least wild card spot to Chicago, and if they for some reason win the division, it's Detroit as the first wild card,
Right.
and then that leaves 2 spots for 3 teams. All these teams have kind of issues. Green Bay is youthful, and we still don't know if we're on the same hype train as Jordan Love. He's going to have the smallest sample size of a big time contract ever. It's going to be Brock Osweiler esque. That's not saying that he's going to be Brock Osweiler and just be a total bum after his deal. But basically, Brock Osweiler had half a season where he was manageable when it was Peyton's last year. He was hurt and then also not very good.
Right.
Kills it. Then, they're back and forth, win a Super Bowl, and then he signs a big deal with Houston, and that were one of the worst contracts ever.
Right.
Well, Jordan Love, he was basically Desmond Ritter for half the season and then had an incredible run. Can't take anything away. It's exciting, it's fun, but guess what? You got to pay him $200+ million now. And I just don't know. On top of that, a hard schedule. On a power ranking, any day of the week, right now, I support the fact that they should be in front of Dallas based on what they did and what they finished the season as.
Of course.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to predict Green Bay to easily finish above Dallas.
Right. No, if you look at and I completely agree. Like, we can't forget that there were 4, 9, and 8 teams in the NFC last year. 4, and Green Bay was one of them. Green Bay won on a tiebreaker. That's how they got in. It was a tiebreaker that got them in, and then they of course had a great game against Dallas. Don't get me wrong, they did, and I believe Detroit. Was it Detroit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Detroit though is a in division foe. They played them twice already. It's hard to beat somebody 3 times, no matter where you play. Green Bay's just an interesting spot. I think that predicting if Dallas is going to make it, we need to predict basically directly on their schedules. Green Bay's schedule is tough.
Tough.
Let me pull it up while you get onto some Rams because I know that the Rams need to be talked about.
We were kind of like really close on the tiebreaker between the Rams and the Cowboys, and we did like a head-to-head, just really quick win or loss for both of them. They both finished 10-7, and we had to go for like the third tiebreaker to decipher them, and Dallas won that tiebreaker. But at the same time, Dallas just I hated everything about their offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard to give out Fs for certain situations, especially because they didn't really give out a terrible contract or something like that. It's just they did nothing. And when you're going all in, quote unquote, even though that apparently means other things to the Joneses, they just didn't do enough. They got worse, and they ended the season so terribly that it's hard to trust them. Their schedule is okay. They're the same strength of schedule as the Rams. It's really easy to just pencil them at 10 and 11 wins, but I see they have the energy, the vibes of a disaster approaching.
Well,
there's always teams.
CD isn't there, things like that.
Dak, they're letting him play out his contract. Micah wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback. And it's just like you should have paid all of them at this
Yes.
point, and you haven't, and now you're going to suffer. And whether that starts during the season or after the season remains to be seen. But they are going downhill. It's happening. Like they're going to have to rebuild. On top of that, Zach Martin's going to be retiring soon
And their O
or being moved on
line,
from.
they starting 2 rookies on their O line, most likely. Most
Exactly.
likely.
There a lot of depth. The pass rusher's gone. They lost their DC that's been really solid, and then bring in a guy that was out of football last year. So we don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We don't. But yeah, there's not good vibes. It's really hard to not give them 10 wins right now, which would easily get you in the
Right.
NFC. However, I can picture situations where they just imagine they start out. Let me pull up their schedule real quick, and then we'll jump back over to Green Bay.
Right.
So they start on the road against Cleveland. They're underdogs right now against Cleveland. I'd probably pick, if I had to guess a head to head, I'd give them the win. But let's just say they lose. And then right after that, you have Baltimore, you have at Pittsburgh,
Right.
not easy, and then home against Detroit, who probably should have beat you last year.
And will
in Dallas.
come with that
And
vengeance.
they are better than
They're
you.
not going to be
They're
happy.
better than you.
Yeah.
And so you could very well be 2-4 going into your bye. And then all of a sudden after that, you got at San Fran, at Atlanta, Philly, Houston.
Poof.
And then at
Damn.
Washington, who I'm on the board and record saying that they are going to take one from Dallas this year.
Right.
So I could see situations where that just collapses. And again, probably not going to predict that, but I can see it happening.
I watched ESPN Bet today, and they were talking about Dallas' schedule, and one of the guys on there said they're going 7-10. And I watched him pick the teams, and I was like, it's reasonable.
I can see it.
But of course, we don't project that. We expect them to get 10 wins. We think that they are probably good enough to make the playoffs. But it's just bad things can happen in Dallas right now. But going back to the Green Bay point, because we're going to finish the NFC group here, and then we'll talk about the AFC. But the Green Bay point is the team's not in their conference because, I mean, in their division is difficult, right? I mean, it's possibly the best division in football right now. You can say whatever you want about the North, AFC North, but the NFC North is really good at football. So not including those teams, you got Philly, Indy. Oh, they get to play the whole AFC South. So they got Philly, Indy, Tennessee, the Rams, Arizona, who we think is really good at football and could be one of those teams that's got a little thorn in your side type of team. The Texans, Jacksonville, and then they play San Francisco, Miami, Seattle, who we think is a team that could do the same thing as Arizona, and then they get New Orleans. There's just a lot of teams on there that I'm like, these are all close games.
Mm-hmm.
And you coming out unscathed is just not something I expect. There's some games that are gimmies. Say they got 4 gimmies, but
and again, they finished the season strong last year, but they were a 9-8 team.
Yeah,
it's just all their wins came at the end of the season instead of
Thanksgiving
spread out.
on.
Yeah, exactly. So, like them, just again, it's a lack of believing in Jordan Love, just continuing taking another step,
right?
And then also tough schedule. And then that doesn't even include the Rams, who, again, we think one of the 3 won't make the playoffs. Well, guess what? Look at the playoff odds right now. The Rams are plus money to make the playoffs now. Chicago has people are on our side now. We were very early to the party, but Chicago's minus money. So that the Vegas is backing our prediction of Chicago making the playoffs. And the Rams are the biggest dog in terms of that group of 4 to make the playoffs. And I just think that they're the safest of the 4. I'm sorry, of these 3.
Of the 3, yeah. Because then, we're talking about NFC versus AFC. Those are,
What's really interesting is, we got Buffalo and Miami. We'll talk about them now. Again, AFC, it's really tough. You're probably going to have a 10-win team not make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. They're all minus 155 or higher. The Jets, the Bills, and the Dolphins to make the playoffs. And there is no chance on this earth that all 3 will make it.
No
I think
way.
it'll be 2 of the 3. I have no confidence in telling you which 2. But if you say that 3 happen, then that means that presumably the biggest favorites
North.
being...
I mean, the AFC North.
Yeah.
There's
presumably saying that Baltimore and Cincinnati are in, then that means you're saying that Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, Indy, and the Chargers are all missing. And I just don't see that happening. So I think, again, Buffalo or Miami, I'd probably lean that one of them miss. Buffalo has the much tougher schedule. They got a lot,
I have it up if you want me to read it to
yeah,
you.
go ahead.
So week 1, Arizona, Miami, Jacksonville. Then they play Baltimore, Houston, the Jets. And then they get a gimme, Tennessee, Seattle. But then they go Miami, Indy, Kansas City. Come off the bye to play San Fran and okay, this is where it's hard. They go San Fran at home, at the Rams, at Detroit. That's tough. But they get lucky because they play New England, New York, and then New England. So they get the New England double in the last 3 weeks, which makes it a little bit easier, I think.
And then with Miami, their problem is what was part of their decline last year. Not only was it some injuries, but it was also playing in the cold. They're
Right.
now infamously bad at playing in the cold. It's a multi-year sample size, right? Well, their last 6 games, they on a short week on the road in the Green Bay Tundra. And then you got home against the Jets, which good, it's on, at home. You're on the road against Houston, which not weather related, but you're going to be dogs in that game. And then San Francisco, you will be dogs in that game. At Cleveland, will be cold, and then at the Jets, it will be cold.
Jeez, those
That's
are
your
tough.
last 6 games of the year.
Well,
and good case scenario, probably that's 2 of the 6 you win, and all of those are tiebreaker type of games that
right.
might knock you out.
I remember having this conversation with you, actually. We did the schedule on Buffalo, and we said Buffalo wins out or wins the last 3 games to make it into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they get in, because that's what they did last year. And it's, it's very possible when you have New England, the Jets, and the New England. And of course, Detroit, San Francisco, Los Angeles is hard, but you're probably going to win 1, maybe 2 of the 1.5, say. So you go 4.5 basically at the end of the year. You're pretty comfortable. It's all good. You're pretty comfortable at that point. So I think that the Buffalo Bills are my favorite in this group, and that's why obviously Miami's lower. They have the 6th hardest strength of schedule though, and Miami has the 24th. But it's just timing with Miami that sucks. So,
right.
And then for our most likely to not make it, hard to see the path teams. Let's start with Tampa Bay because I think Tampa Bay's in if they win the division.
Yeah,
and
that's really their only path because I just don't see them in a wild card situation because right now it's uncomfortable, but Atlanta is juiced to being over 9.5 wins.
Mhm.
Would not bet that in a heartbeat. However, I understand why because they are by default the most talented team. New Orleans took a step back. Tampa Bay lost depth, and line is one of the worst. People are getting older, and then Carolina 2-15, they didn't have a first round pick.
Right.
So by default, Atlanta is the best. So really, Tampa, I don't know if 9 wins get you there this year. I don't know if it comfortably gets you there. And honestly, I would probably favor somebody like Arizona over them in terms of like a wild card race. So really, it's division or bust. Back-to-back seasons where they're 8-9 and then 9-8. Fantastic into the season. Blew out the reigning NFC champions in the Eagles, who collapsed, and then really were close and neck with Detroit. They just threw a pick at the end. And what can you do?
Right.
Strong into the season. They're the only team in that division that does not have a top 5 easy strength of schedule. So usually that means that teams that are worse have better records than they appear. And then when you don't have those kinds of schedules, sometimes you're a little worse than you appear. That's just kind of what it is. They're one of the least efficient run games back-to-back seasons. And again, I can see the scenario where they win the division because I think they're probably the only challenge Atlanta has to win it.
Right.
However, I think that's their only path.
Well, I was going to say, so right now Atlanta's juiced to go over 9.5. They're minus 160. And then Tampa Bay's juiced to go under 8.5, which is at minus 130. So, but I see a scenario where they're both 9-8 and Tampa Bay holds the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
And that's not, crazy to me. So they, I think that the number that matters is what are the odds to win the NFC South? Plus 320?
That's a really good bet.
That's an awesome bet because you're getting, because right now Atlanta's minus 120 to win that division.
No chance.
That's crazy to me. I mean, yeah, they're probably the favorites, but maybe plus 180, plus 140, and then
140. If Baltimore can't be
yeah,
even money, then
that's what I'm
why?
saying. Minus 120 is crazy to me. But that's just it just represents the fact that this division's not very good, too. But yeah, Tampa Bay could do that. I think that's, and like you said, that's their only way in. They're not getting in on schedule alone. So
Right. Yeah,
and
and then with Cleveland, they have the
tough.
hardest strength of schedule in the entire NFL this year, and it just doesn't look good. I see a lot of losses in the early parts of their season, and also, they had a great run last year, but pretty much they didn't hit their stride until Joe Flacco took over,
Mhm.
right? And they did win 11 games in spite of having four different quarterbacks. Very impressive. However, I feel like that's more lightning in the bottle compared to what they're actually going to do. And really, it's just not trusting that they can get to 10 wins. And
Right.
especially the fact that my favorite bet right now on the entire board is Cleveland under 8.5 wins because it's juiced to the over.
Okay.
And I just don't think there's a chance that they have a winning record this year. Um, and if that happens, then there's going to be a lot of chaos, firings.
Yeah.
Kevin Stefanski will definitely be gone. I don't know how they can get out of Deshaun's situation, but they're probably going to try,
Yeah.
or at least eat the bullet, and then just kind of do a full blown tank.
Russell Wilson esque.
Yeah, exactly. So
Well,
it doesn't look great. Go ahead.
sorry, I was gonna say one thing that I did notice when I was like thinking of talking about like Cleveland before is last year they went 8-1 at home, and they were 3-5 away games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that actually kind of plays to the schedule a little bit. They get Dallas at home on non division games. They get Dallas, they get Kansas City, they get Miami, and they get the Chargers, and they get the Giants. So I think those are all winnable games at home. Of course, then they also get their division, but it's like pushing 9 wins to me. I think 9 wins is where I'm at on them.
Yeah.
9 wins is where I'm at.
Again, it's just like when we're trying to do win-loss records, like what's the gimmies? And you look at their schedule, they got a week 3 home against the Giants.
Yeah.
You've got a couple they'll be favored against, like on the road against Denver, on the road against New Orleans, on the road against Washington. But they're not talented enough to where I would just easily bet them outright. And I bet you they drop at least one, but maybe even two of those games. And then after that, it's just chaos.
Yeah.
So, and then on top of that, ending the season, you got at Pittsburgh, Kansas City, at Cincinnati on a short week, Miami, and then at Baltimore. All of those are good teams. And then couple that with an at New Orleans and at Denver that you could very well lose.
Mm-hmm.
And then another Pittsburgh game on a short week. So there's no gimme wins at all. And it's just, like
tough.
I said, hardest strength of schedule
tough
this season. But then you look at Pittsburgh.
Oh, they've got so
and the reason
screwed.
They're one is they got so screwed. This is the hardest schedule I've ever seen to end the season. They play, again, toughest division football.
Week 11.
All four teams winning record last year. They play all 6 division games after their bye. And the only 2 games in between that is Philly and Kansas City. And on top of that,
don't forget about
at Philly, at Baltimore, Kansas City. That's in a 10-day stretch.
Damn. That's so awful. Tough, man.
That's so awful. How do you get to 10 wins again this year?
You have to win all the first 8.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
Exactly. And then on top of that, like, yeah, it's I don't see the path there. I'm not going so far as to say that this will be Mike Tomlin's first ever losing season, but it's in the realm of options right now. I think it's more likely than not that happens. And that doesn't mean that, he's out or it's a right. pressure to win season, because really it's makeshift quarterback play that they got 2 cheap guys on cheap deals. It's all short term. And then probably next year they're going to be drafting a quarterback, and then they'll probably reset their quarterback timeline.
Right.
Just kind of
could be this year.
Do like they always do and be formidable.
Could be this year. I mean, there's a lot of, quarterbacks in this draft that have a chance to go mid first round, early second. Could be this year. But at the same time, I wanted to read this off to you. So AFC North, hardest division in football. Baltimore plus 140 to win it. Cincinnati plus 145 to win it. Cleveland is plus 575 to win it. We think Cleveland's formidable as a team. Like, they're good at football. Their defense is, top 5 every single year for the last, 5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, plus 750.
Like how are you considered a playoff team if you are 7-1?
Well, let me
to win the division.
Yeah,
I know it's a tough division, but you're close with them.
let me see what Cleveland's. So they're at minus 215 to not make the playoffs right now, which makes sense.
But again,
but that's still too close.
So they're heavy over to get over 8.5, but you're so heavily under to not make the playoffs. So that basically means everybody's like, no, they're going to win 9 games but miss. Like, that bet doesn't really correlate.
So they're actually at under 8.5 at minus 160. So right now it's juiced to the under 8.5, which makes sense to me. I think they get 8 wins.
Are you talking about Pittsburgh or are you talking about
Pittsburgh?
I'm talking about Cleveland.
Yeah, they're over 8.5.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're over 8.5, but then they're minus 200 to miss, right?
That was Pittsburgh.
So what are they to miss?
Let me go get it.
Because it's a favorite to miss.
Yeah, it's got to be. Let's see where those orange helmets at. Minus 180 to miss.
So it's like, why is it so heavily up there, but it's so heavily...
Yeah, I don't know.
So that basically means like people that are betting are like, they're going to finish right here, this small little window. Yep. And I'm just like, nah, I'd rather just...
Yeah, they're going to get 9 wins and not make it.
At least Pittsburgh is, they're best to go under and to miss.
Right.
Like it's like...
Makes sense, at least. Yeah, no, it's a little weird.
Again, 6-7 teams every year miss the playoffs the following year. And so probably about half these teams that we mentioned are going to miss. And there's a good chance that we'll be picking a lot of the people in the first 2 tiers or in the most recent 2 tiers to be missing. I think when we did a first, like, really quick glance, like we said 6, which is right on par with what we are. We'll be putting out a prediction video at the end of August for like win-loss records, season predictions, and full bold, records. All that good stuff. Because we're going to go game by game. We're not going to just like, I'm going to say 10-7. No, we're going down to the 4th tiebreaker.
Yeah,
like, we're going that far.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be really exciting. On top of that, we have so much fantasy content coming out. It's peak fantasy season. All 32 teams are now at training camp. It's real news. It's really exciting. We got 40 days till the season kicks off. Please like, comment, subscribe to all those videos. We just started our Football Academy series. So Emery and our fellow co-founder Dusty will be, doing the ins and outs of the X's and O's of the game. It's a lot of fun. It's for the common fan that doesn't really, get the whole ins and outs of football. That caters more to Emery's strengths because he was a collegiate player. He also coached in college. So be sure to be looking out for those. Check out that intro video just to kind of get an introductory to what you should expect. But yeah.
Yep. We appreciate y'all. Go check out our Discord's being launched. Twitter will be getting lots of stuff going on in Twitter.
A lot of news.
Yeah, because everything's coming out. And it's the biggest time of year for that. So we're going to put as much stuff as we can out there so y'all have it all. And please ask us questions on all of the stuff we send out to you because we want to hear what y'all think. And if y'all believe what we believe or don't believe what we believe, have questions about normal things, we can answer them. And we're excited to just, continue growing the community. Yep. So we appreciate y'all and we'll see y'all next time.
To the next one.